Today, we are going to talk about how to tackle the housing affordability crisis in Toronto. And we have none other than Matt Young, President and CEO of Republic Developments, here to talk about why has housing become so unaffordable in Toronto? This is a real hot button topic. And Matt is becoming a leading voice in the development industry, proposing innovative solutions to the crisis by drawing attention to issues that are currently not being addressed by all levels of government and mainstream media. We're also going to pick Matt's brain about where he sees the condo market is today, and more importantly, where he sees it going in the future. Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. My name is Ralph Fox, and I am the broker of record and co-founder of Fox, Marin Associates. We are one of Toronto's most innovative and active real estate team brokerages in the city, focusing on central and downtown Toronto. Please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. Matt, it's absolutely awesome to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So, Matt, I want to jump in a little bit to your background so that our viewers can get a little bit more sense of who you are and your experience in working in Toronto real estate. I know from your bio, you've been doing this for over 14, 15 years. So you've had a lot of experience. You've done over 15,000 units that you've brought to market or sold in approximately 12.2 million square feet with a development value of $13.5 billion worth of real estate. So I definitely think you're very qualified to talk about this topic. And then going into 2019, you actually started and founded Republic Developments. How did I do?
You did great. Did you read off my website? What did you do?
Yeah, I did pretty much. Pretty much. So I just want to make sure I did a good job of it. How did you get into real estate? Like what led you down this path?
Yeah, I mean, I've told this story before, but I was one of those guys in university who had no idea what he wanted to do. So I ended up just doing a general degree. Every summer I would come home, I would get a different summer job. And it was really about sort of trying different things and seeing if there was anything I would like. And so, I tried marketing and I tried a few different things. And I think my third summer, I ended up working for my uncle who owned some small real estate in the Beaches or East York area. He owned some small commercial properties, a few apartments. And so I spent a summer painting a building and stripping paint on a building and just doing laboring work. And even though, I was probably terrible at it, I just enjoyed the tangible aspect to it. I love the fact that, from where we started in the summer to where the building ended in the summer, how much better it looked, how it impacted the street, how it impacted people walking by. I love the fact that you could get creative. And so it really kind of like struck a chord with me. And then I started doing more research on it, trying to figure out, okay, like what is this job? And like, what's the path that I could get involved? And so I always had a very creative side to my brain. And I thought, okay, fixing something that's existing is cool, but what would be even cooler is building something from scratch. And so that kind of led me down this rabbit hole of learning that real estate development is a career path and there are jobs within that space. And I started doing all this research, trying to figure out what that meant and what it looked like. And so towards the end of university, I kind of realized that's what I wanted to do, and then I kind of set my sights on trying to achieve that. So, I graduated, I spent some time that summer traveling. I graduated at maybe the worst time in the last 25 years. I graduated in 2007, just as the recession was starting in the US and, Canada was starting to feel a little bit of the pain. And so I spent that year, 2007, 2008, really not doing much. I was interviewing, I was trying to meet people. Nobody was hiring. There was a lot of concern in the market. And then I went back to school in 2008. I went to the University of Calgary at their business school at Haskayne, where they had a real estate development program. And it was a one-year program. So I said, if I can't get a job in the industry, let me go back to school and get some form of experience. I don't want to waste another year. So I went and did that. And it kind of gave me a great foundation. It helped me understand what development really was. And we had guest professors coming in who were actual developers. And I got to pick their brain and learn about what they do and how the business worked. And so I was at this point so 100% bought into this. And I love the idea of what development was. And so once I graduated, I came back and did a bit more traveling because the market was still pretty rough. And then in September of 2009, I got my first job. And never looked back.
Awesome. And so where was your first job?
First job was with Lifetime Developments.
Okay.
So, everybody knows Lifetime. They're one of the biggest developers in the GTA. And I was kind of joining them at a time where they were going through a bit of a transition. They were sort of transitioning from a low-rise builder to more of a high-rise builder. And so they had already purchased a number of high-rise sites. They had partnered with a number of others and launched some high-rise sites, but they were now really starting to do it for themselves. And so they had this big pipeline of amazing projects.
Yeah.
And they had a really small team. So it was myself and Brian Brown, who you probably know, and they had a great team, but Brian was sort of leading a lot of the planning and marketing and sales and all that sort of work before it got to construction. And so I was kind of his right hand and just helped him with everything he needed help on. And it was the best learning experience I could have had. What was great about it was that they let me see and touch everything. So I got hands-on experience with property management. I got hands-on experience with asset management. I got hands-on experience with planning entitlements, with design, with marketing and sales, PR, every aspect of the process you could imagine, I got some level of experience on, and we got to do some amazing projects. And it was a period where they had some amazing success. Every project ended up being a great success. They sold really well. It was at a point in the market coming out of 2009. From 2009 to 2012, it was kind of a pretty strong market. So we launched 5 projects in that period. Actually, 6 projects were launched, but one of them was like ready to go when I started. So I didn't really have much involvement in that one. But I was involved in 5 launches during that period, and kind of, it was like my PhD in real estate working there.
Awesome. And then from there, according to your website, you moved on to Capital Developments.
I guess it was a little later, 2012. I joined Capital Developments, Jordan and Todd. They were at the time sort of an upstart developer in Toronto. They had done some amazing work in Eastern Europe, had great experience, and they were moving back here. They wanted to raise their families here. They actually moved back earlier, but then they also went through the recession. And so there was a bit of a restart to the business come 2012 or so. And so I got brought on to manage a portfolio that they had in partnership with 3 developments. So I was kind of jointly brought on by the 2 companies to lead portfolio, and 2 of the projects at Redpath and Roehampton, 155 Redpath and 150 Redpath, were sort of my babies for 5 or 6 years while I was working there. And so that was a great opportunity after I'd kind of learned I think the basics and got my foundation with Lifetime. That was an opportunity to develop more leadership skills, to take more ownership in the process, to have a little bit more decision-making in the process. What was great about that was they left a lot of responsibility on me where, they kind of said, Matt, the success and failure of this is on you. So it's up to you to figure out a way to make it successful, and you're either going to sink or swim. And that's the kind of environment I've always thrived in. I like when people, give me an opportunity, and I hate disappointing people. So I did everything I possibly could to ensure that they were successful. And from there, bought more sites and launched more projects. And we had a great run there. I was there for 8 years, and it was an incredible 8 years. And so, that was kind of the next stage of my career. And then eventually I just felt like it was time to give it a shot on my own. I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always had this drive to build something for myself. 2019 sort of felt like the right time to do that.
At the time. And then in hindsight, it's
and then like 6 months later,
like, oh my God.
My timing is perfect with everything.
Yeah, 2007, 2008, 2020, you have your own company. So how'd you come up with the name Republic?
It was a little bit based on this philosophy I had around how to manage how I would manage a company. Like, one of the things I was really lucky to see while I was at both Lifetime and Capital was we partnered with a lot of different developers. So I got the visibility from like inside visibility on how all these different companies worked, how they managed their teams, the types of people they hired, how they operated in meetings, how hard they pushed, how soft they pushed, just everything I could possibly learn, I was learning. And what I tried to do was take the best elements of because all of these companies had something that was really special. That's why they're so successful.
Yep.
And so I tried to take the best elements of each that I could find. And one of those things was this idea that everybody should have a voice at the table. Like, I remember being at Lifetime, and I had no business being asked serious questions about a project. But they would ask me questions often in meetings in front of other people, asking for my opinion. Oftentimes my opinion was really dumb. Probably more often than not, it was dumb. But every once in a while, like a broken clock, I was right. And I had a good idea, and that good idea translated into value. And I think what was maybe what helped me was that I wasn't afraid to share my opinion, even if it was a little bit dumb. So this idea that everybody should have a voice within the company, I think is an important one for us. And so this idea of a republic is that everybody has a voice.
At the table.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not just people within the company. That's also stakeholders we work with. That's also government, anybody else who we're engaging with through the process. By the way, including brokers and including purchasers. I remember early on when we were working on Scarborough Junction, which was our first project, we did a crowdsourcing campaign early on to get feedback from the community on what they wanted to see in the project. And we spent weeks and weeks distilling down hundreds and hundreds of submissions where they were answering, a few dozen questions, and distill that down into a report that would inform what we would do on that project over the next 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. And, it's amazing to say that where the feedback started to where the project ended is very, very similar. So I think you can get a lot of value in soliciting feedback and getting people's views.
And so the idea of republic is just being able to listen to everybody and everybody has a stake.
Yeah, like that's sort of the definition of a republic, right? Everybody's got a voice.
I love it. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, like what has been your biggest learning since you started Republic? Like what was your biggest, you've done so much in your career to get to this point, but now that you're here and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this massive thing. I'm going to start Republic. You're looking back, it's 2024. Like what were your big surprises or learnings?
The biggest one by far is that whatever you think is going to happen is not going to happen. And so you have to get really good. You have to get really good at adapting and adjusting course as you go. And sometimes it's hard when you're like in the thick of it to know if it's time to shift gears or if it's time to pivot a little bit or not. I think honing that skill is an important one. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect at that, but it's something I'm starting to get better and better at. Just because like we've gone through so much. Like when we launched, then COVID hit and, we were at a period where we, had our first project. We were trying to get our second project. We had a site tied up. It failed in the first 4 months of COVID where, we couldn't raise the capital because everyone was scared the world was ending.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, we're into like high flying territory where the market's back and people are launching condos again. And we went through the biggest bull run probably of all time. So it's just amazing how quickly things can shift and how
now here we're here.
And now we're in the I'd say we're in the hangover period of an unprecedented bull run, and that is also creating challenges. So, it's been a lot of ups and downs from that perspective. But I think what's always important is if you believe in what you're doing and you believe in the fundamentals of the market and you believe in your team and your product, you sometimes have to just double down, maintain that conviction. In cases like today, it's buying yourself the time you need to get to a better place where the market conditions are better.
How many projects do you have right now, or what would you say your pipeline is? I know things are on hold, but if you looked at like what Republic has within its portfolio, how many units, how many projects are you guys looking to bring to market once things turn around?
Our pipeline's about 12,000 units, but when you break that up, it's broken up into a few different types of projects. So one of those projects, which is the lion's share of those units, 60% of those units, is Scarborough Junction, which is a large master plan. There's 14 towers. It's a really incredible, new, exciting project, a very big project. You're not going to be able to launch 14 towers at once. And so you have to absorb that over a period of time. It's probably, if you look at it, it's 14 individual small projects, but you can only really launch one at once. So I would count that as one project. And then we've got a portfolio that we've partnered with the family office on that there's no real timeline for when those projects will ever launch. The goal was to zone the land, maximize the value of the land, and then wait until, market conditions and the family is ready to do something. And then at that point, we would look to move those forward. And then we have, two other, one project that's in market right now and another project that we just got approved. One is already there and the next one in theory would be the next project to launch. So, so we're still a fairly small company. It probably seems like we're bigger than we actually are, but we're still very lean and mean and we operate it like a very entrepreneurial, small scale, scrappy business still. So I think we need that mentality to be successful.
I agree. Another question you have from a business owner to another business owner: how do you manage stress? Like, it seems like with all the different components that you have and the number of zeros on your pro formas and the number of different inputs that you have coming, especially at a time of uncertainty, like we were talking about before we started filming, like, how do you manage all of that? Because I know from my end, it can be very stressful. And I'm just wondering, with everything that you have going, how do you handle that? And you seem like a very even keel type of guy, but how does that work into your day?
Yeah, I think I've gotten better over the years at managing stress. Like, I think working in high pressure environments for a long enough period, you start to develop different
Calluses. Yeah.
skills to manage those stresses, or identify when a stress is coming on and figure out how to manage it so it doesn't, boil over and cause problems within your business or your family or whatever it might be. So I think over the years I've gotten better at that. Part of it is trying to stay healthy and stay fit, eat well. I don't drink very much. I don't eat a lot of sugar, things like that can, impact you physiologically, and then we're very solutions oriented. So like generally, and this is like since I've been a kid, like if anything was going wrong, my natural state is find a solution for it.
Yes.
My natural state is not sit and complain and cry about why it's, not great. I will still, do that on occasion and commiserate with people every once in a while. But my general approach is, okay, we have a problem. What's the solution to the problem? And start thinking about solutions. And I think I've gotten pretty good at getting very creative on how to solve complicated problems. We talk about in our company, there's sort of 3 key pillars like that we would say are like pillars to our culture. And one of them is innovation. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily innovation of technology or things like that. It's about being creative on problem solving and finding creative solutions that can let you move forward in difficult times. And so I think I've just honed that skill over the years and gotten better and better at it.
That, I think, is a great segue into what I really wanted to get into with you on this conversation, other than getting to know you a little better and having our audience have the ability to do the same. From a developer standpoint, what challenges right now are developers facing, aside from high interest rates and inflation and cost to build, but in terms of moving things with the city forward, so that, because everybody now seems to understand something that we've been talking about for a very long time, and I'm sure you have, that the housing affordability crisis that we have is very much supply driven. And so from a city standpoint, what sort of challenges are you facing as a developer? Because you naturally want to bring more supply, you want to bring more inventory out into the market. But why are we having this bottleneck? And what is stopping from people like you bringing this much needed supply online?
I think to start, it's important to recognize that a home is not a home until somebody can actually move into it.
Yes.
Development is a series of phases of a project in order to bring that home on stream. You have to buy land, you have to go through the planning entitlements process, you have to market the project if it's a condo, you have to eventually sell the project if it's a condo, pre-sell the project. You then have to advance your design and get your permits and start construction. And then, so there's all these different steps. For a long time, the biggest challenge and what the industry was always talking about was entitlements, approving enough housing quickly enough. That has consistently been a problem. Like since I started in the industry, that's always been a challenge. It's definitely gotten worse over the years, no question. As you add more rules on top of more rules on top of more rules, you just create an environment where everything is stuck. It's like, imagine having an engine with no oil in it. It's clunky, it doesn't move, it seizes up, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the system that we have today. There was a period where I think the provincial government was starting to push, and now the federal government creating incentives to approve more housing. And so I think we've seen a slight improvement, and I will say slight, like not nearly enough is what it needs to be, but we've seen a slight improvement over the last, let's say 12 months, maybe even a little bit longer in terms of advancing projects. It still ultimately relies on people on the other side of an application and their work ethic and their policies and rules that they have to follow. It's still difficult, but we at least, and this is just speaking for myself, we don't have any issues with approved land. We've got a whole bunch of approved land. And I think a lot of other developers have a whole bunch of approved land. So putting that aside, that is not, in my opinion, the number one issue today. The number one issue today is the sales side. And you guys see it every day. Once you've got a site approved and you launch it and you bring it to market, if you can't sell the product for whatever reason, then it doesn't become a home. So today, in this interest rate environment, going through what we went through after COVID, all the uncertainty, we talked about it offline before, a lot of the uncertainty in the world, not a lot of people are excited about the idea of buying real estate at this particular moment. And so that is a bit of a challenge. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves thinking, okay, well, why are people not excited about real estate? And there's certainly some macroeconomic things, whether it's wars and just, some uncertainty globally. I think that definitely plays a role. Interest rates, of course, play a very important role, although we're now starting to see rates drop. And so we're going to start to see, as we get more rate drops, how that changes demand. And I suspect it will bring demand back into the market. But another element of it, especially with pre-construction, which is a business I'm in and you guys are in a lot of, is that people need to feel optimistic that the investment they're making is going to be a good investment. And I think to do that, there's a lot of things you have to think about, but probably the most important one that people think about is the market going to be higher tomorrow than it is today? When we got to this super low interest rate environment, prices super high, construction costs super high, costs across the board became way too high. You needed those prices in order to make the project pencil to even build it, which means people had to buy it at those prices. It's not like developers could just magically wave a wand and drop their prices $300 a square foot. I think in this environment today where interest rates are and kind of this general slowdown of buying real estate assets, people don't feel the confidence that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And so we started thinking about why that is. And part of it is that the costs have just gotten so high to build, which means the cost to buy have to be high. And a lot of those costs didn't exist 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So can we not go back to a system that was working 15 years ago and try to bring costs down and make it more affordable to own this housing, this new construction housing? Mm-hmm. And because if you want supply, you need to build new stuff. That's how you create supply. So you have to solve the new construction housing side of the equation. That's the most important thing to solve if you want to bring new supply on. So we think the best way to do that is removing input costs and making it cheaper to build. If you can make it cheaper to build, you can sell it cheaper and you can create more optimism that tomorrow will be better than today.
And right now you have such a big gap between, let's just talk about condos, between resale condos and pre-construction. If you could buy a resale condo for $1,000 a square foot, $1,100 a square foot, and then you're looking at something that's pre-construction is at $1,600 or $1,700 a square foot, there's a really big gap that now somebody is going to really think about, well, if I am going to buy, and there's not a lot of buyers out there, wouldn't I be better off buying and or investing in resale versus pre-construction? And I think that calculus has caused the slowdown because of that gap, where when people are transacting, it's strictly on the resale side. And I think that's why we've seen this tremendous slowdown on the pre-construction side. And
you're absolutely right. That to me that's the number one thing buyers are going to look at is why buy pre-con when I can buy resale for 35% cheaper?
Exactly. And until that gap closes, right, you're going to have very little pre-construction sales. And so I think interest rates and the economy will eventually see condo prices go back up, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. But it's still that gap that's creating that problem. And I think one of the things that is atypical from a market is usually supply can react to demand by adjusting prices. And so people would normally think, well, why don't developers just charge less per square foot, make it more in line with current realities, and be able to sell pre-construction so that we can keep the supply going. But unfortunately, that's not the case because a lot of these costs are fixed. It's not profit. That $600 a square foot is not profit for developers.
Believe me, we wish it was profit. I always hear people online and politicians and everyone talks about developers making too much profit. It's just not the case. If it were the case, you would have seen developers dropping their prices 25% already.
Exactly.
They would have responded to the market.
So, and this comes to what your project is, or what your involvement with CANTWIN, which is the Coalition Against New Home Taxes, are. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because earlier you were talking about one of your core strengths is being able to recognize problems and problem solve. And when I was listening to you say that about how you've built that culture within your company, it sounds like that this is a way to try and have an innovative approach to try and find a way to bring new supply online.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of that campaign was really to raise the conversation around taxes. I think for the last 3 years, the conversation for housing has been around approving more housing, allowing housing, different forms of housing typologies in neighborhoods and things like that, creating more opportunities for housing to be built. And that is very important work, and that should continue. But if you approve all the housing in the world, but it's so expensive to build that nobody can build it, then you still have not created a home. That, I still go back to that. And so we felt it was time for the conversation to change to how do you bring pricing down? How do you lower the cost to build? And there's a number of ways you can do that. But the most immediate one is to deal with input costs. And input costs, if you can remove things from your budget, from your pro forma, every single dollar you remove that's unnecessary would allow pricing to come down equal to or greater than that dollar. So my team, I had them do a study back in October of last year. So about a year ago today, we did a deep dive on our pro formas. And what we did was look at a project from 2009 that I did to today and tried to we adjusted the pro forma so it was apples to apples in terms of project size. And we looked at every single line item in the budget and wanted to compare what changed over that period. And so we looked at land, we looked at construction costs, and we looked at soft costs, and we looked at taxes, and we looked at everything in between financing costs. And it was very clear to us that the thing that moved the most as a percentage by far were taxes. And in terms of dollar amounts, it was also taxes. So when I started in the business, we were paying roughly 12% of the cost of a home to build. Our cost to build, 12% of that were some form of taxes, whether it was parkland, dedication, Section 37, development charges, education levies, application fees, property taxes, everything we pay on the project, roughly 12% were taxes. At the time, that amounted to something like $36,000 or $38,000 in terms of real dollars per unit. Today, that number is almost 30%, a little over 29%.
That's crazy.
And it's about $240,000 per unit. So the tax amount in real dollars has gone up, almost 600%. Clearly, there's a problem there, right? That's crazy. And if you look at the cost of a one bedroom today downtown, you're $700,000-$800,000, maybe more in some cases. Over 250 of that is as a result of taxes, because on top of those taxes, you now need a profit margin on those numbers. You now pay more in broker commissions and you pay more in construction financing costs and everything else because of these taxes. So, when you're talking almost 30% of the cost of a home is tax, I think we've got a problem. We've lost the plot.
So what you're saying, Matt, is you guys, developers, are taxed, and then that tax just gets passed on to the end purchaser.
Of course, it has to be passed on.
Right.
Because a bank will not finance our projects if it doesn't financially pencil. Why would a bank give you a $200 million construction loan if you don't have enough margin in the project where one tiny little error can put you offside and now the bank is not sure they're going to get paid back? So you have to have enough of a profit margin to get a bank comfortable that they will finance your loan. Literally, the day I started in this business to today, profit margins have really not changed very much.
And what would you say that is percentage-wise for the viewers? Because people think big, greedy developers, but on a typical pro forma, what would you be looking for?
Generally, what we look for when we underwrite is 15%, but generally it ends up landing between 12 and 15% is typically where it lands. Banks will accept 12 to 13% profit margins. We try to underwrite at 15, but usually what happens is things go wrong, time delays happen, whatever happens that erodes that margin a little bit and you end up, somewhere a little bit lower. Also important to note is that of that profit margin, it's not the developers making most of that money.
Yeah.
It's, an institutional, real estate private equity firm or ultra high net worth families or pension plans or whoever the limited partners are of that project make the lion's share of that. The developer makes a little bit of it, maybe, 2, 3, 4% of it. But the lion's share of that is made by ultra high net worth or institutional capital who is just looking for a return. And so you need those people to want to invest in the project to enable housing to be built. And so you don't want to demonize them. You need the developer to have incentive, to want to do this. They have teams that they want to take care of. And so they need to make their money. And so the margins have not materially changed in the last 15 years. What has changed, though, is costs have gone up substantially. And as a result of costs going up, pricing's had to go up in lockstep pretty much.
That 30% would be a very significant reduction. And it's interesting to me because you see all these politicians talking about the affordability crisis. Never once do you ever see them talking about that 30%, not even coming up with a solution, but it never even enters the conversations. And one of the things that I've thought about is, because you were mentioning this earlier, the taxes on gas or the taxes on cigarettes. When you get gas, there's that pie chart. So every time you're putting the nozzle into your car, you're at least seeing that.
You have a painful reminder of what these taxes add up to.
Yeah, and I think on every pre-construction showroom we should have one of those pie charts, and it should be mandated on every price list that a developer puts out so that people can actually see where their money is going and how this is all breaking down, because I don't think the public understands this.
That is definitely a challenge. And, we've jokingly talked about that. Maybe like when people come in and get pricing on one of our projects, we break it down with a little report showing how much of that went to taxes. I'm not sure that would help sell anything, but maybe
No.
I'll solicit your feedback after the call. You can tell me if you think it'll work. But yeah, I think it's important that people understand what the issue is, because I think for way too long, people have sort of demonized we're an easy scapegoat, right? And look, I don't care. You can get upset with us all you want, but it's not going to change the system. We talked about it before. Like, I like to solve problems. And I think to solve problems, you have to be honest with yourself about what the problem is. If government really seriously wants to solve housing, and it's the number one election issue in Canada right now, 49% of people think housing affordability is the number one election issue. So there is an incentive for government to want to solve this. The problem is, I think governments have gotten very used to the money that comes in, and the idea of giving that up, their first question is, well, where do we backfill it? And I think, we're in a difficult time in government where we're not getting a lot. Like, everyone feels you're paying a lot of taxes and you're not getting a lot for it. And I think we've lost this idea of trying to grow the pie. We need to go back to growing the pie instead of this idea of scarcity where everyone's just got their hand out for a little bit more and a little bit more. We need to go back to creating an environment where people want to invest and build businesses here and grow our GDP and create opportunities and create more jobs. And if we can do that, then the pie will grow and you won't feel like you need that extra, 1% of taxes, on your budget to balance yourself. Like, you don't need that. For example, we've done an estimate and it's roughly 1% of the federal budget comes from HST on new housing construction. You cannot take any politician seriously if they said they could not find 1% of efficiency within their overall budget. I don't think you can take that person seriously if they say that. So the question is you trying to find 1% more or less important than making housing affordable for young Canadians across the country, given that 49% of people think that's the number one election issue? It seems so obvious to me that you should be bending over backwards to try and fix that problem. We're pounding the pavement on it. There's still a lot of work to be done. We have gotten some positive reception from government, so I think that's encouraging. But the question is, when are you going to solve the problem? Are you going to get this done in the next few months? Or is it going to take 2 years? At that point, it might be too late.
Yeah, 100%. And the problem that I see, and it's something that you were touching upon, is there seems to be this desire, either from the media or from politicians at all levels of government, where they're always looking for a scapegoat. If it's foreign investors, well, it's easy to point at them because they can't vote. Or it's evil investors, or it's greedy developers, or it's real estate agents. It just seems like they're always looking for the boogeyman rather than having the real conversation. And that conversation is that we're all overtaxed and it's really constraining supply because it's making affordability just out of reach. And so until we're in a position where we can have those real conversations, and that's really why I wanted to have you on this on our podcast, because I think it's really important to be having this conversation. And I really, really commend you for taking the initiative to try and bring this to the forefront, because it's something that needs to be discussed, and it really isn't right now. And so when you see politicians and when you see people talking about affordability, we have 30% to play with, a margin that could be affected almost overnight if there was some real action that politicians on all levels wanted to have. And the only way that's ever going to happen is by bringing this into the discourse, so into the conversation. So I think what you're doing is amazing. There's a lot of people in our industry who completely agree with what you're saying, because we're seeing it and dealing with it every single day.
Yeah, for sure. And thankfully the conversation is shifting. We launched our campaign back in August, and we got a ton of press and a ton of media. That has then since worked its way through the industry. Build, which is our kind of government lobby group, they have launched now their own campaign to talk about taxes on housing. And so I think they launched a couple of weeks ago, and they've got a great media budget that they're pushing out there. So they're pushing their own conversation. We've got a follow-up to our campaign, hopefully coming out later in October, if all goes well, which will again try and, I think the goal of our follow-up campaign is to really resonate with the general public. The first campaign was really speaking to government. The second campaign is now going to be trying to speak to the public to help them understand what the problem is. Because I think ultimately government's not going to act until enough people reach out and enough people put pressure on them and they start to feel it, when election time comes, this is an issue that people want us to address. We need to come up with some solutions to address this. Our goal is just to be relentless about this and keep the conversation going until we start to see some action.
Relentless is one of our core values at Fox Marin. If there's any way that we can help participate in your push in October through our channels, we'd be happy to do it, because we really feel that this is an important message, because it's a real problem. The affordability issues, and you're seeing it have a trickle-down effect through our entire society. And there's a lot of stress that's being magnified because of this. And you're really getting to a point where the idea of the haves and the have-nots is really starting to diverge. And you're seeing that through real estate. And it's one of the things that I talk about and have thought about a lot over the years. Is it's almost like feudalism in Europe, where generational wealth is being passed down through real estate. Whereas if you're graduating school and you have student debt and you're making $75,000 a year in this current environment, how are you ever going to catch up? And the question is, you might never be able to.
Yeah, it's very tough. And like I talk to friends and other young people, you start to see like they're forming families much, much later in life. Many are opting not to have kids. It's causing these trickle-down effects throughout our society, as you pointed out. Many of those things are actually much worse. Like if we, I saw a stat that if our population numbers or our reproduction numbers stay at the same pace, I think over 3 generations, like we'll have population collapse.
Yep.
That's a big problem. How are you going to sell your mansion when there's nobody there to buy it? So like a lot of the asset values and everything here are based on a society that continues to grow. And you've created an environment where young people don't want to invest. They don't want to take on risk. They don't want to start a family. They're just kind of operating, from the scarcity mindset. Again, it's not a healthy way to live. It's not a healthy way to run a country. And so I think government has to kind of clue into the bigger picture here, which is that we need people to want to live here and plant roots here and invest in their future. And to do that, it starts with housing. Like if you're paying 50% of your salary to rent an apartment just to get by, and like that's not a way to live. Why would you do that? Go to Bali. You don't need to be here.
Bali sounds nice right about now.
But like, I half joke about it, but if your alternative is like live a kind of miserable life here where you can't afford anything, or go somewhere else and just like fully check out. But it's like, you're almost making a choice. I'm checking out of the system and that's what's going to be my life. But if you're not going to have a family and kids and invest in something and try and build something here for yourself because you just don't feel there's an opportunity, then you really shouldn't stay here. You shouldn't stay here and try and stick it out. Like, what's the point? You may as well just go enjoy your life. You only get one shot at this.
So what keeps you engaged? What keeps you here? What keeps you pushing forward? What keeps you pushing this initiative? What keeps you driving Republic?
I love the business. I love building housing. I love the creative aspect of it. I've said this before, but I enjoy type 2 fun, which is like when you're doing the thing, it's not fun, but when you're finished doing the thing, it's really fun.
Yeah.
And real estate development is very much that type of, that's like a job specifically designed for people who like type 2 fun, because it's painful the entire way through. You just deal with setback after setback. A friend of mine who works for another developer, he once described it as continually being punched in the face and continuing to walk forward. I enjoy the kind of the journey and the challenge of trying to make things work. And that makes me happy. Yeah, for me, this is great. But like, I'm in a better place than most. I'm a little bit older. I think I was able to buy a home when it was more affordable. You know, I still live in a condo. It's not like I'm living the life of luxury. I live in a condo. Live a fairly normal life. I've got my business and I love, what we're doing. That keeps me going. But I could easily see how a lot of people wouldn't
100%
have that and would be like, why am I continuing to do this? So, and by the way, I'm not advocating for people to like check out of Canada and leave. What I'm actually saying is government, like this is what people are going through. You need to start paying attention to this. This is a much bigger issue than you are appreciating, and something needs to be done. We've got such a smart, talented group of, young population, but like you can't take everything away from them and expect them to then invest in this country. You have to give them a real shot.
3 things you would do if you were in control of, forget the level of government, but let's just say you had the ability to change and affect things overnight. Could be real estate, could not be real estate. It could be whatever you would do. What would the 3 things be?
I think number 1 would be cutting taxes, both real estate and general taxes. I think I would be going back to a more stable level of immigration. I would also focus immigration on what we need in this country. Mm-hmm. So I would be focusing on trying to get people, who have money, who want to invest and build a business, labor where we need, we need a lot of construction labor to help build this country. There's a lot of investments we need to make, people like that. I would be putting them at the front of the line. I don't know, I can't think of a third right now, but those 2, I think alone probably move the needle quite a bit, right?
I think so.
Like you don't have to, you know what it would be? Probably removing a bunch of regulation, a whole bunch of regulation. There's way too much regulation in everything. And I'm not saying don't have like a, regulation on food or things like that. But in fact, I'd probably strengthen regulation there, but I would just remove regulation, make it easier for people to do stuff, remove some of the burden and some of the roadblocks, make it so Canada is the easiest place to set up a business, the easiest place to invest in. Make it so money wants to come here. The way you grow an economy is you want foreign direct investment. You want people investing in this country. You want more money flowing in than is flowing out. Let more money flow in. Make it easy for money to flow in here and make these investments. And you'll see our country grow again.
You have my vote.
I would be a terrible politician, by the way.
So would I.
Never get elected.
I agree with
an absolutely terrible politician. The media would rip me up. It would not be good.
Well, I would agree with all 3 of those policies, and whoever would run on that platform would get my vote then. Last question, just want to wrap up. I know the condo market is struggling. I'm seeing it every day. I look at the comments in our YouTube section, on our YouTube channel, and everybody's just dying for it to crash. I don't believe it's going to happen, and I think we're turning the bend. But I just would like to turn around that corner. But I'd like to get your opinion, where you think things are at, the condo market, resale and pre-construction, and let's say where you think they'll be by 2030.
We talked about where things are at. The resale market is slow, but pricing has come down quite a bit. I actually think there's good value in the resale market right now. I think people who are looking to buy their first home, it's probably a pretty good time now or in the next 6 months as interest rates continue to drop, it's probably a good time to be looking at the resale market. Pre-construction is a little bit tougher because pricing is higher. Now, look, you get a brand new product, the design is fresher, less maintenance issues, things like that. But I still think there's enough of a gap that it's going to be a hard sell for a lot of people for a lot of projects. There's some projects that maybe are in a slightly better financial position to be able to have pricing lower. But for the most part, I think that market is going to be tougher for a little bit longer. That being said, I do think by 2030, the market's going to be, I suspect, much higher. And the reason for that is because we still have a very high level of immigration. Most people, especially, in Canada, want to move to Toronto, like new immigrants coming here. Toronto is sort of like the number one spot everybody wants to go. Mm-hmm. And then, you have 2 or 3 other cities that pick up a lot of the other immigration. And then kind of you get the rest of it scattered. But it's not like the US where there's like 40 different cities that you can move to that are all amazing. Like in Canada, we're a little bit more concentrated. So because of that, I think there's always going to be demand in Toronto. And because of this slowdown we've had over the last couple of years, and I think, there's maybe another, let's say, year of a slowdown, maybe 6 months to a year, depending on how people respond to interest rates. That whole period where projects have not been starting construction or where starts have slowed substantially, it's going to mean by 2027, 2028, there's going to be no supply on the market. Yeah. And we're going to go right back to, bidding wars and people bidding up housing because we just won't have enough of it. And this is one of the things government needs to really be careful of is you can't have these like massive swings. Like I know it sounds great to say, okay, let the system, blow off and then prices will all come down. Like it just doesn't work that way for pre-construction. Prices won't come down. You just won't build. And that's what's happened now. We're just not building. And if you do that long enough and you underbuild the housing, we're already underbuilding housing. So if you then further underbuild housing and you maintain a level of immigration that we have, it's just going to make things a lot worse. So I actually think now is probably a good time to invest in real estate. It doesn't sound like it's the greatest time, but what's the saying Warren Buffett had? I think it's be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. So, a lot of people are fearful right now. I think, if you have long-term conviction in Toronto, I think now is not a bad time to be looking.
A 1-bedroom condo in 2030. We've asked this question to a lot of guests. Everyone seems to come out around the same number. What do you think?
How many square feet?
600 square feet.
2030. I think you're over $1 million for sure.
Thank you. I've said that. We've had so many, and usually the comment section will blow up because of that. So hopefully you set it on fire, but that's kind of where I see things going as well.
Well, look, here's the facts though.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to predict this because the costs to build are going to be high enough that you will have to sell them for over $1 million to make money. So unless you believe that no new condos will ever be built again by 2030, then I think that's a foregone conclusion because construction prices are going to keep going up. You've got unions who control most of the industry. They negotiate labor rates every few years. They're going to continue to go up every few years to kind of keep up with inflation and keep up with affordability. The commodities markets are global markets, and so you pay what the market pays. Unless government's prepared to massively cut taxes, and I think if government did what we're looking for them to do, realistically, you could drop prices 20% overnight. Maybe a bit more, maybe upwards of 25%, depending on the project, but at least 20% you could drop your prices overnight. That would help reset. You'd be able to bring pricing down probably, between $200 and $300 a square foot, give or take. I think that would be a massive reset. And so if that happened and your pricing went from, $1,600 down to $1,300 or $1,300 down to $1,000 or $1,050 or whatever, I think maybe there's a possibility that, that 600 square foot condo is not $1 million if they do that. But if they don't do that, no chance. It's going to be over $1 million by 2030. And probably substantially over $1 million. I wouldn't be like, it's not going to be $1,000,001. It's probably going to be like 1.1, 1.2. There's not really another way to build it, and keep pricing down if costs continue to go up the way they have. So,
and meanwhile, you have Christina Freeland saying that by increasing the uninsured cap from $1 million to $1.5 million is going to open up supply. Like the government right now clearly is out to lunch in terms of what needs to be done in order to help give us this relief. And I think you've given a really, really solid solution, and it's facts-based. And I haven't heard anybody else come across something that could move the needle so quickly in such a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, her perspective on the market is an interesting one.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and be very polite. Her policy is around creating more demand, and I suppose it improves affordability in terms of like the monthly rate that somebody pays. But what you become is just a renter.
Yeah.
You're not a real owner. You're a renter. You're paying most of the money you spend every month is to pay interest on a mortgage.
And the only achievement of this policy is only going to be price appreciation. It is going to have, because it's demand side, it's not going to help on the supply side, and it's not going to bring down the cost of new homes, which we so desperately need.
I would welcome a conversation with her to help better understand, and like an honest conversation to help better understand how she's thinking about things, how her staff are thinking about things, and why they're proposing the policies that they're proposing. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Nope.
But look, government's complicated, and there's always different factors pushing you in one direction or pulling you to another direction. And often I think the public is very quick to judge sometimes without knowing all the information. So I'm very much interested in transparent conversations, understanding what the challenges are. Even in the conversations we've been having with government, one of the first questions we ask is like, what are the impediments to you being able to do this? Help us understand your challenges so we can come up with some solutions or suggest some ideas on how to overcome this. Because I know it's not as easy as just cutting taxes and it's done tomorrow and calling it a day. There are definitely challenges to doing it, and there's political challenges, there's budget challenges, there's all sorts of things. If we understand what they are, we can help you solve them. So I would love a conversation with her to help me better understand, what her challenges are and how can we come up with some policies that actually work for Canadians, also work for them, and help get the industry back on track. I think every level of government should be open to having those conversations.
I think you might make a good politician after all, but
trust me, I will.
I think that was a great answer. Matt, where can people find you, and where can they find more information about what you have coming up in October?
You can go to our website, republicdevelopments.com. I'm on all the socials. You can find me on X, myoungto. I'm on Instagram, although it's private. And you can go to CANTWIN.CA. So if you feel like taxes are too high in housing, you can go to that website. There's a section there where you can email your representatives. Go there, send them an email, blast them, send them 10 emails, send it to your friends. We want to make sure they're getting tens of thousands of emails into their inbox, and that Canadians are telling them very clearly, you got to do something about this. And I think if we can put that pressure on them, I think we'll see government start to react a lot quicker.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope our viewers do as well. And we're happy to have you here today. And for anyone who's watching, please be sure to comment down below. Matt or myself would be happy to answer any comments or questions that you have about what we talked about today. And please be sure, don't forget to subscribe or hit that like button. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.